Hey everyone, just wanted to take a couple of minutes to go over the week 2 written responses assignment with you. We're going to pull that up and take a look. All right. Okay, so this is very similar to what you completed for week 1. The only difference is that we are covering 2 chapters this week instead of just one single chapter. But you will need to have gone over those chapters. That could mean just using the lessons provided in the week 2 module for chapters 2 and 3. That might mean just reading chapters 2 and 3. It might mean a combination of those things. That totally depends on you and what works best for you. But just know that as you are answering the questions here in this assignment, you will be expected to, make connections between the chapter material and your responses. All right. It is a file submission. I have it here in a Microsoft Word document that you can use. You can download it, fill in your answers, save it, upload it, or, don't forget, I can also accept Google Docs, a PDF, Open Doc. Just keep in mind the only file format that I am unable to open or convert is a .pages file. All right. And it will be graded using the written responses rubric. Let's get into the questions. Our first question from chapter 2. So we're talking about an analogy that's used in Eastern philosophy between ice and water to explain the relationship between wisdom or reason and the passions, emotion. So this is kind of discussed in chapter 2. It says that wisdom and passions, like ice and water, are not two different things, but neither are they identical. So the ice cube is not the same as the water we put in an ice cube tray, but it's also not different from the water that we put in the ice cube tray, right? Similarly, while thinking operates according to the rules of logic, emotion is governed by a different type of logic known as the logic of the heart. So I want you to compare and contrast this analogy, right? The ice and ice cube analogy with the charioteer analogy that's used by Plato. And you can go review that under the traditional views of reason section towards the beginning of chapter 2. It goes through that, the charioteer analogy that Plato used. So basically what you're doing is you're going back and you're reviewing that part on Plato's analogy of the charioteer when talking about wisdom and emotion, right? And you're going to compare it and contrast it with that Eastern philosophy between the ice and water, right? Okay. All right. Our second question, it says, looking back at your own experience in high school and college, or perhaps even the workplace, were the males and females and or people of different racial and ethnic groups treated differently? What assumptions underlie the differences in treatment? Were any of the assumptions justified? Explain why or why not, right? And again, this is tying into what was discussed in chapter 2. Our third question. We have an African philosopher here, right? This really interesting claim here that the Western belief that Africans are governed by their emotions, right? This assumption, I say belief, but what we really mean is this assumption that Africans are governed by their emotions, combined with the belief that reason and emotion are mutually exclusive and that reason is superior to emotion, right? That those beliefs/assumptions have been the source of much of the prejudice against people of African descent, right? That Africans are ruled by their emotions, and emotions are inferior to logic and reason. There's 2 assumptions there. First, you have to assume that that is correct, that logic trumps emotion, is better than, is superior to, right? But that's the first assumption. And then the second assumption is that Africans are governed by their emotions. That those 2 preconceived notions combined have been the source of much of the prejudice against people of African descent. So first, Discuss the influence of this belief on race relations today. Where do you see that? Does it, you may not have ever looked at it in that way. It may have never been presented to you in that way, but do those assumptions play out in your experience? Have you seen that, right? Discuss the influence that those beliefs have had on race relations today. And then B, can you think of any other groups that have been marginalized or disregarded because they are also assumed to be governed by their emotions? Explain your thoughts, right? Then we have question 4 here. So this is it's a touchy one, but I want you to just hang with me here. So Anwar al-Awlaki, allegedly the spiritual advisor to the terrorists of September 11th, 2001, once said to journalists that, quote, telling people to give their lives for their faith is not an unusual idea. That's the same thing as telling Marines in this country, the United States, Semper Fidelis, always faithful, Semper Fi. The advisor is basically saying that asking a person to remain always faithful to the Marines and agree to risk their life for the Marines in their country is not much different than the September 11th terrorists who were asked to give their lives for their faith. So I want you to analyze that statement, that comparison. Again, you're being asked to analyze it, not react to it, right? This isn't about whether you agree or disagree or how it makes you feel or anything like that. And that's why I say it's touchy, because we all probably have a lot of thoughts. But we're looking at an objective analysis of that comparison that he's made, right? Okay, then we're moving on to chapter 3. All right, so the first question for chapter 3, I have an article that I've linked here, 8 reasons social media is no good for kids. Hopefully that link works for you. If not, you can try to just Google the title or reach out to me if you have problems, right? But I want you to read that short little article, and then I want you to discuss how that writer is using language or discourse to achieve their objective, looking especially at word choice, tone, etc. The first thing here is you kind of have to figure out what the objective is. I mean, 8 reasons social media is no good for kids. The title should give us a pretty good clue as to what the objective is. Social media equals bad, right? But how is the writer using language and tone and word choice to get that objective across, right? Again, you're not being asked to respond to this, or give your own opinions. You're looking at how this writer has presented the objective, right? Question number 2. Theologian Mary Daly writes, quote, the biblical and popular image of God as a great patriarch in heaven has dominated the imagination of millions over thousands of years. The symbol of the Father God, spawned in the human imagination and plausible by patriarchy, has in turn rendered services to this type of society by making its mechanism for the oppression of women appear right and fitting, right? That we have identified God as male. The way we have structured our society as a patriarchy where men are in charge, that both of those together have allowed for the oppression of women to seem like it's the right way to go, that it's totally fitting that women are less than because we have identified God as a man, right? I want you to discuss Daly's claim that the identification of God as male is oppressive to women. Discuss whether we should change the language used in religious texts and services to gender-neutral language in light of the role language plays in shaping our worldview. Note, we are not talking about changing the language because women are offended by it. We don't even know if that's true. It's not about people being offended, right? or of any sort. We're talking about changing the language due to how important language is in shaping our worldview. Would changing the language to something more gender neutral benefit how women view themselves, how they view the world, and how the world views them. Think about it, discuss, right? And then question 3. How do the labels you use for yourself, how you label yourself, as well as the labels others give you, influence your self-esteem and your goals? All right? Love these. Very thought-provoking questions. Again, some of them a little touchy. But for the most part, a couple questions here, you're being asked to give sort of like your personal perspective, but pay attention to each question and what you're actually being asked to respond with. Because if you're being asked to analyze something, you're not reacting to it. Analysis is more objective, right? You're looking at how the things are working, if they're working, why they're working or not working. You're not giving your personal reaction to it. All right. Some of these you are, right? Some of these are all about you. So just be very careful as you're reading each question. I hope that this verbal explanation has helped. If you have any questions, absolutely reach out. Otherwise, just do your best to have the assignment in by the due date, which is Sunday at 11:59.